In this video, you're going to go ahead and use local storage and lifecycle methods to add data persistence to the counter example. So as we count up and down, we are going to store that count. And if the user were to close down the tab and come back, we're going to pick up right where they left off. That means you'll need to use lifecycle methods and local storage to keep track of that count over time. Now, there is no need to use any of the JSON methods. We are not dealing with an array. We are just dealing with a single number. And there is one thing you're going to need to know before we get started, and we'll explore that over in the console. When we first explored local storage, we saw that it was a string-based key value store, and that's going to be really important for us when working through the counter example because we have a number, we don't have a string. So while we don't need to use json.stringify and json.parse, we are going to have a few problems. If we save the number and we fetch it back, we're actually going to have something like this. So we have a const num, and we'll set it equal to the string 12. Now we have this string 12, but we need the number 12 because if we try to perform math operations on this string, it's not going to work. Right here, if I take num and I add 1 onto it, we get 121 as opposed to 13. It sees we have a string. It sees we're trying to add on a number, so it implicitly converts this over to a string, and all of the letters, all of the characters are just concatenated. We want them to be treated as numbers that should be added, and to do that, we're going to use parse int. Parse int takes your string, in this case it could be num, and your base. We're obviously working in the base 10 system, and if we run it, it is going to return the actual number, not a string. So now we could rerun that command, and we could also tack on a 1, and we're going to get 13 as opposed to 121. Now, what happens if the data stored in local storage is not just a string with decimal characters? What if there are some alphanumeric characters inside of there? Well, we can explore what happens by using parse int. I'm going to parse the string ABC, and I'm going to go ahead and pass in 10. And the result is NaN, which is short for not a number. This is letting us know that the result of our operation was not a number, an error occurred. We're going to see the exact same thing if I were to try to take the string A and multiply it by the number 33. JavaScript has no idea what to do, and the end result is not a number, letting you know that your math-based operation didn't work successfully because there were some type conflicts. Now, what you're going to need to do after you use parse int is to check the type, making sure it actually is a number and it's not NaN. And to do that, you can just use is NaN. This lets you check if something is NaN or not. So if I do take A and I multiply it by 33, I'm going to get true. The result of this is not a number. But if I were to provide two numbers and a valid number came back, it would be false. This is not a number. It is indeed a number. Now that we're reading data from local storage, it doesn't really make sense in either application to allow the user to pass a prop in anymore because we're just going to read the saved data. So for in Decision app, I'm going to go ahead and remove props.options, bringing it back over to an empty array. And down below, we can go ahead and delete the default props. And we'll do the exact same thing for the counter example. Over here, we're going to go ahead and set this equal to 0 by default. And down below, we're going to remove the default props. Since we are going to be reading from local storage, any prop that got passed in would just be overridden. So there we have it. Take some time to knock this one out. You're going to need to do a whole bunch of stuff. You're going to want to switch Babel over. You're going to want to set up component did mount and component did update. And you're going to want to use local storage to get everything working. When you're done, go ahead and test your work. Increase the count up to 9, for example. Refresh the page and you should still see 9. And you should still be able to manipulate it. So starting at 9, you should be able to go down to 8, 7, and 6. Refresh again and see 6, so on and so forth. Take as much time as you need. There is no rush. And feel free to refer back to app.js if you get stuck or you forget how something works. Pause the video and when you're done, click play. How'd that one go? Hopefully you were able to set up those lifecycle methods inside of the counter component. I'm going to go ahead and kick things off by switching up the command inside of the terminal. I'm going to reload the last command and use Control A to jump to the beginning. Right here, playground / counter example.js. I'm going to run that, switch back to the browser, and we should see the counter app. Now currently, if I change the count to -4 and refresh the page, that's lost. We start off at 0 again. We want to go ahead and fix that. And step 1 is going to be to save the count when it changes. So right here, to do that, you needed to use component did update. Component did update is going to give us access to the new count values. It's going to let us know when the count changed. Now we also have access to the previous props and the previous state. I am going to pull off the previous state because I do want to add a little bit of conditional logic. So right here, I'm going to use console.log component did update. I can save the file and we can see what happens in the browser. Now, obviously, as we change the count, the message is going to print, but just like remove all in the Indecision app, reset is going to cause the component did update lifecycle method to fire, even if it switches 0 to 0. So every single time we click reset, we get that message. Now, currently there are no real performance implications. It's really cheap to write to local storage, but later on, as we write to real databases, it's going to get really, really expensive. So I'm going to use an if statement to make sure the count has actually changed. Then and only then will I use local storage.set item. Right here, if the previous state.count is not equal to the current count, this.state.count. Only if they are different, we are going to use local storage.set item to set the item. Now remember, this is a key value store, so we need 2 arguments, the key and the value. You could have picked any key you like. I'm going to use count, and the value is just going to be this.state.count. That number is going to get converted over into a string, but that should at least be getting saved. So right here, I'm going to go ahead and increment that count. Let's bring it up to 5, and let's see what's inside of local storage. Local storage.getItem, and we just set up the item with the key count. So I'll fetch that out, and right here we're getting the string 5, which is a great first step. The only thing left to do is to actually go ahead and grab that inside of component did mount. Component did mount. Right here, what are we going to do? We're going to set up our method, and we're going to kick things off by getting that string out of local storage. Now I'm going to make a const called string count to differentiate it between a number count, and we're going to set this equal to local storage.getItem, and we're trying to get the item count. Excellent. So that is the first step. Step 2 is to actually parse it using parseInt. This time we can create a true count variable, setting it equal to parseInt, passing in the 2 arguments we know we need to pass in. First up is the string count. Second up is the base 10. Now that we have the count, we need to do one more thing before using this.setState. We need to confirm that the count is actually a number and that it's not isNaN. I showed you how to do that with the isNaN method right here. We're going to toss that in an if condition. isNaN. We're going to pass in the thing we think is a number, and we're going to hope for the best. Now this is going to return true if it's not a number. We're going to flip that. Now it's only going to return true if it is a number, and if it is a number, we will use this.setState. There's no need for an else condition. If it's not a number, we're just going to allow the default to be used, which is 0. So this.setState, passing in our updater function. We don't need access to the previous state. We already have the value we were trying to set. And we are going to implicitly return an object by wrapping it in parentheses. Right here, setting count equal to the count variable. And we know when we have an object property whose value comes from a variable with the same name, we can just use the shorthand syntax like this. Let's go ahead and save counter example. Over inside of the browser, we should now be able to mess around with this. So step 1 is to actually change the count. You can see that 5 actually is already here. So it loaded from local storage. We can tweak the count up to 8. I can refresh the page. I can close the tab and open it up again. The count still shows up. Now the same thing is true if we were to use reset. So I'm going to reset the count. It brings us back down to 0. And if I come back into the application, we're still at 0. So there we have it. The counter application is now persisting data. In this case, there's just one piece of data and it's just a number, but the exact same techniques are going to be used for more complex applications as well. That is it for this video, and that is it for this section. To wrap this one up, I'm just going to head into the terminal real quick. and I'm going to switch the Babel command back to running app.js. As long as we see the indecision app over inside of the browser, we are all done. In the next section, you're going to learn about tooling. So we're going to ignore code for a little while. We're not going to learn anything new about React. Instead, we're going to learn about a fantastic tool called Webpack. It's going to allow us to avoid those script tags in index.html, and it's going to allow us to break up our app into multiple files. I'm very excited to get to all of that, so stay tuned. I'll see you in the next section.